A Boeing 737-800 on a completely normal approach suddenly goes around. Minutes later, it belly lands on the opposite runway at nearly 200 knots with the gears still up, the flaps retracted, and almost no way to stop. It slides the length of the remaining pavement, crosses 300 meters of clearway, and hits a concrete embankment at the far end. Of 181 people on board, 179 are killed. The two survivors are cabin crew, sitting in the very back of the aircraft. This is the story of Jeju Air Flight 2216, and as of today, we still don't have a final answer for why it happened. What we do have is an interim report, confirmed physical evidence, video footage, and a very clear understanding of the systems involved. That's what this video will cover. Not speculation, not rumor, but the things we actually know and what they tell us. On the morning of December 29th, 2024, a 15-year-old Boeing 737-800, registered Hotel Lima 8088, was operating a scheduled flight from Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi Airport to Muan International Airport in South Korea. The aircraft had been delivered new to Ryanair back in 2009 and transferred to Jeju Air in February 2017. As far as we know, it was in good technical condition. Jeju Air is a low-cost carrier based in South Korea, operating since 2005, with a fleet of mostly 737-800s. Flight 2216 was one of 4 weekly rotations on this Bangkok-Muan route, especially popular during the Christmas holiday period. On board were 175 passengers and 6 crew. The captain was 45 years old, a former Air Force pilot with over 6,800 hours, including 2,500 as pilot in command. Early reports described him as an unwavering professional who valued safety above all else. The first officer had 1,650 hours total, with most of that on the 737. The aircraft departed Bangkok just after 2:30 in the morning local time. The flight was expected to last about 4 hours, and the cruise proceeded without any reported issues. This is actually worth noting. A 4-hour flight, departing in the early morning hours, means the crew would have been airborne through a period of naturally low alertness. Getting sharp for the approach after that kind of cruise can be difficult, especially if the approach looks routine. And this one, on paper, was completely routine. A standard ILS to runway 01 at Muan, until it wasn't. Muan International Airport sits very close to the coast in the middle of a wetland, a perfect habitat for birds. The airport has the highest bird strike rate of all 14 regional airports in South Korea. Before this accident, 10 bird strike incidents had been recorded at Muan since 2019. As Flight 2216 descended toward the airport and was cleared to land on runway 01 at around 8:54 local time, a caution for bird activity was broadcast on the tower frequency. Now, a bird caution is not a directive to discontinue the approach. It means be vigilant. Birds move fast and unpredictably. A flock can shift position between the time the warning is given and the time the aircraft passes through. Bird cautions are a normal part of operations at airports near water and wetlands. The approach continued. Then, at approximately 8:58, the aircraft appears to have flown through a flock of birds. Video recorded by an observer on the ground shows puffs of what looks like smoke or debris coming from the right engine, and, on closer inspection, a smaller puff from the left. ADS-B data indicates the aircraft was between 500 and 900 feet at this point, fully configured with gear down and landing flaps set. Investigators later confirmed the birds were Baikal teals, a species of duck common in East Asia, each weighing about half a kilogram. DNA from these birds was found in both engines. Now, the CFM56 engines on the 737-800 are certified to withstand ingestion of birds up to a certain size while continuing to function. Most bird strikes leave nothing more than a dent, some feathers, and a strong smell of cooked poultry in the cabin or cockpit, depending on which engine was hit, since the left air conditioning pack feeds the cockpit and the right feeds the cabin. Serious damage is rare unless the birds are very large or there are many of them entering the core at once. There have been a handful of cases where bird strikes cause severe engine damage or even dual engine failures. The most famous is U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the Miracle on the Hudson, where a flock of Canada geese destroyed both engines shortly after takeoff. There was also Ural Airlines Flight 178 in Russia, which landed in a cornfield after losing both engines to birds, and a Ryanair aircraft in Rome Ciampino in 2008 that suffered a dual strike on approach. Recent industry guidance tells pilots that if they see a large flock of birds during approach, they should only go around if it is clear that the maneuver will keep the aircraft away from the flock. If there is any doubt, it may actually be safer to continue the approach, because the engines are at lower power settings in the landing configuration, so any bird ingestion will cause less damage than it would during a go-around, when the engines are spooling up to near maximum thrust. On top of that, continuing the approach keeps the aircraft in a position to land immediately if engines are damaged. But this guidance may not be universal. Some airlines may have their own procedures, or none at all. In that case, a go-around could be the instinctive response when birds are encountered. What happened in the next 4 minutes is where the certainty ends and the questions begin. Within seconds of the apparent bird strike, one of the pilots declared mayday and reported a bird strike and go-around. Declaring mayday for a bird strike is unusual unless there are indications of significant damage or system malfunctions. At almost exactly the same time, 8:58 and 50 seconds, the ADS-B transponder signal disappeared. Both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder also stopped recording within seconds. The aircraft's speed at that moment was 161 knots, and it was at 498 feet. This is extremely significant. On a Boeing 737-800, the aircraft has 2 transponders, 2 batteries, and 3 generators, 2 engine-driven and 1 from the auxiliary power unit. Even in a complete loss of both engine generators, certain essential systems should continue to function on battery power for at least 60 minutes. Transponder number 1 is on that battery bus. So is radio number 1, the captain's instrument displays, and several warning systems. The fact that the transponder and both recorders stopped working so quickly raises serious questions about the state of the electrical system at that moment. There is a possible explanation. If the first officer was pilot flying, transponder number 2 would have been the active one, and transponder 2 is not on the battery bus. Similarly, this aircraft was manufactured in 2009, which means it may not have been equipped with the recorder independent power supply upgrade that was introduced around 2010. Without that upgrade, the recorders would also lose power with the generators. In any case, from this point forward, we have no flight data, no cockpit voice recording. The last 4 minutes and 7 seconds of the flight, from the moment the recorders stopped to the moment of impact at 9:02 and 57 seconds, are missing. Reconstructing what happened during those 4 minutes will be the central challenge of the investigation. What we do know is that the aircraft initiated a go-around. On the 737, a go-around starts when the pilot flying presses the toga buttons and calls go-around flaps 15. The pilot monitoring verifies the speed, moves the flap lever to the 15-degree gate, and confirms the thrust levers have advanced to the go-around setting, typically around 90%, and 1 if the auto throttle is engaged. The aircraft should then climb at roughly 1,500 to 2,000 feet per minute. Within seconds, the pilot flying checks the climb and calls for the gear to be retracted. If one engine has failed, the procedure changes but remains well trained. The pilot flying maintains control of the aircraft and, if the approach can no longer be stabilized, initiates a go-around. The aircraft can climb on one engine. It is slower. It requires more pilot input to counteract the asymmetric thrust, but it works. Pilots practice single-engine go-arounds regularly. What pilots do not regularly practice, because it is so catastrophically unlikely, is a dual-engine failure on approach. There is no formal procedure for it beyond the basic principle: do not let the aircraft stall. With no engines, the aircraft becomes a glider. It loses energy rapidly. The pilot's job is to find somewhere to land before the speed bleeds away, and to keep the wings flying all the way down. The pilot monitoring would attempt the memory items to restart at least one engine. But if there is no time, there is no time. It falls to the captain to make a plan, with whatever altitude and speed remain. The aircraft must have been able to climb at least somewhat after the go-around was initiated, because it subsequently executed a left turn, and then a right-hand circuit to line up with the opposite runway, runway 19. The pilots requested and received clearance to land on 19. Based on simulator experience with dual engine failures, a 180-degree turn typically costs around 1,800 feet of altitude. So the aircraft must have gained at least that much before beginning the turn, which suggests either at least one engine was still producing some thrust during the initial climb, or the aircraft had enough energy from its approach speed to convert into altitude before the engines fully failed. If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now, to understand why the landing looked the way it did, you need to understand how several critical systems on the 737 connect to each other, because they are all linked in a chain, and when the first link breaks, everything downstream goes with it. Start with the engines. Each engine drives a generator that produces AC electrical power. The left engine powers one generator, the right engine powers another. There is a third generator connected to the auxiliary power unit, the APU, a small jet engine in the tail that can be started in flight. These three generators feed AC power to the aircraft's electrical buses, which in turn power almost everything on board. Now look at the hydraulics. The 737 has two independent hydraulic systems, A and B, plus a standby system. Each system has two pumps, one engine-driven and one electric. The engine-driven pump on the left engine feeds hydraulic A. The engine-driven pump on the right engine feeds hydraulic B. If both engines lose power, the engine-driven pumps stop. The electric pumps could still maintain pressure, but only if AC power is available. And AC power comes from those same engine generators. So here's the chain. If both engines fail and the APU is not running, there are no generators. Without generators, there is no AC power. Without AC power, the electric hydraulic pumps do not work. Without hydraulic pressure, almost nothing moves. The landing gear, hydraulic A system, cannot be extended normally. The flaps, hydraulic B system, cannot be moved. The spoilers on the wings, which normally deploy on touchdown to kill lift and press the aircraft onto the runway, do not deploy. The thrust reversers, which help decelerate the aircraft after landing, do not operate. And crucially, the flight controls lose their hydraulic assist. The ailerons and elevators must be moved by the pilots through direct mechanical cables, what is called manual reversion. This requires significant physical effort. The response is slow, and pilots tend to overcorrect, producing the S-shaped flight path visible on some of the videos. The rudder is even more concerning. Unlike the ailerons and elevators, the rudder does not have a direct mechanical backup. It relies on the standby hydraulic system, which itself requires a C power. Without a C power, the rudder does not move. On the landing videos, the rudder appears to remain completely flushed with the vertical stabilizer throughout the entire ground slide, meaning the pilots may have had no way to steer the aircraft away from the embankment ahead. The only systems that continue to work on battery power alone are the essentials: transponder number 1, radio number 1, the captain's flight instruments, and certain warning systems. The batteries are rated for a minimum of 60 minutes, but external lighting, cabin lighting, the first officer's instruments, and all the hydraulic-dependent systems I just described are not on the battery bus. There is one system that could restore almost everything: the APU. If the APU is started and its generator comes online, a C power is restored to the electrical buses, which powers the electric hydraulic pumps, which restores normal operation of the gear, flaps, spoilers, flight controls, and most other systems. Starting the APU in an emergency is not a standard memory item for dual engine failure. It sits deeper in the checklist. But experienced crews who have practiced these scenarios know that getting the APU running is the single most important action they can take after losing both engines. In the Miracle on the Hudson, Captain Sullenberger's first officer started the APU almost immediately, a decision that helped maintain hydraulic power and flight control authority throughout the ditching. Even without the APU, there is still one way to get the landing gear down: the manual extension system. This consists of physical wires running from the gear uplocks to the cockpit floor, accessible through a hatch behind the center pedestal. Pulling each of the three handles releases the uplock on the corresponding gear: nose, left main, right main, and gravity does the rest. The gear free falls into position and locks mechanically. But this procedure is practiced only once every 3 years in the simulator. In a cockpit that has already lost most of its instruments, its hydraulics, and its normal lighting, where the pilots may be physically wrestling with manual reversion controls just to keep the wings level. Remembering and executing the manual gear extension is a task of extraordinary difficulty. The normal gear lever will still move to the down position when selected, but nothing will happen. The only way to notice that would be the absence of green gear down lights and the presence of red warning lights, accompanied by a single-tone oral warning below 800 feet. On the 737, that warning does not say landing gear. It is just a tone, easy to miss in the chaos of a dual-engine failure approach. In the video footage of the landing, the leading edge slats appear fully retracted, indicating the trailing edge flaps were also up. No landing gear is visible. No external lights are illuminated, which is consistent with a loss of normal AC power. The only visible light on the aircraft is a faint glow just behind the forward right main door, the emergency exit lighting, which activates automatically when AC power is lost. On some videos, the aircraft can also be seen making small, S-shaped corrections on final approach, which is consistent with manual reversion, the overcorrection pattern that occurs when pilots are moving flight controls through direct mechanical force without hydraulic assist. The aircraft touched down approximately 1,200 meters past the threshold of runway 19. The tail struck first, followed by the right engine nacelle, then the left. With no gear, no spoilers, and no reversers, the wings continued generating lift, keeping much of the aircraft's weight off the ground. The aircraft essentially skimmed along the runway on its engine nacelles. This provided some deceleration, but not nearly enough. It slid through the remaining paved runway, across 300 meters of clearway, and impacted a concrete embankment at the far end. The embankment supported the ILS localizer antenna array for the opposite runway. The impact at high speed was catastrophic. The aircraft was destroyed. Fire broke out immediately. Of 181 people on board, 179 were killed. The 2 survivors, both cabin crew, were seated in the very rear of the aircraft. In July 2025, South Korean media reported that investigators had found the crew mistakenly shut down the left engine, which was still operating normally, instead of the right engine, which had been severely damaged by the bird strike. The cockpit voice recorder captured the captain instructing to shut down engine number 2, the right engine, which was the correct call. But investigators found that the fuel cutoff switch for engine number 1, on the left side, was the one that was actually pulled. Both engines were sent to Safran in France for detailed examination, and analysis confirmed the left engine had no mechanical faults, and its electronic systems were functioning normally. If this finding is accurate, the sequence becomes clearer. The right engine was already severely damaged or inoperative from the bird strike. Shutting down the left engine, the only remaining source of thrust and electrical power, would have resulted in an immediate and total loss of all 3 things the aircraft needed to survive: thrust, AC power, and hydraulic pressure. Everything that the videos show, no lights, no flaps, no gear, no spoilers, no rudder authority, the S-turns of manual reversion, is consistent with a complete loss of both engines and no APU power. Shutting down the wrong engine is not unheard of in aviation. It has happened before, in different aircraft types, under different circumstances. The human factors research is clear. In a high-stress, time-critical emergency, the risk of acting on the wrong switch increases dramatically, especially when the physical layout of the cockpit places the switches for engine 1 and engine 2 in close proximity. It is a mistake that can happen to any crew, regardless of experience. However, this finding has been strongly contested. The Jeju Air Pilots Union criticized the investigation for focusing on crew error, while ignoring other contributing factors, including the airport infrastructure, the bird strike environment, and the question of why the recorders failed so early. The victims' families rejected the findings outright and protested the scheduled release. The report was subsequently withdrawn, and all distributed copies were collected. As of today, no final report has been officially published. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this: the aircraft struck birds, likely in both engines. The crew declared an emergency and initiated a go-around. The flight recorders and transponder stopped working almost immediately. The aircraft executed a circuit and landed on the opposite runway, with the gear and flaps retracted. at high speed with limited or no flight control authority. It overran the runway and struck a concrete embankment. The question of exactly what the crew did during those missing 4 minutes, and why, remains unanswered. This is where simulator experience becomes useful, not to explain what happened, but to illustrate the complexity of what these pilots were facing. In type rating training, some programs include what are called survival exercises, ungraded, unannounced scenarios combining multiple failures simultaneously. One of the most challenging involves a dual engine failure from bird strikes shortly after takeoff or on approach. What becomes immediately clear when running these scenarios is that the crew must separate roles instantly. The pilot flying, who becomes the captain, since only the captain's instruments are powered by batteries, must focus entirely on flying the aircraft and planning where to land. The pilot monitoring must begin the memory items for dual engine failure restart, and then assist with whatever the pilot flying needs. The most critical decision in these exercises is whether to start the APU. If the APU is started quickly, it provides AC power, which restores the electric hydraulic pumps, which restores normal gear extension, flap movement, spoilers, reversers, and powered flight controls. If the APU is not started, the crew is left with manual reversion, flying the aircraft through direct mechanical linkages by muscle power, and no way to extend the gear or flaps normally. The aircraft remains fast and clean, with no way to slow down before touchdown. In simulator sessions, the crews who started the APU early and established hydraulic power were generally able to land safely. The crews who did not start the APU faced an almost impossible task. They arrived at the runway too fast, too high, with no gear, no flaps, no spoilers, and no brakes. The aircraft would touch down on its engine nacelles and skim along the surface, the wings still producing lift, the weight barely on the ground, the deceleration far too slow for the available runway length. The parallels to what the videos of Flight 2216 show are striking, but I want to emphasize, these are observations from controlled simulator exercises, and they may or may not reflect what actually happened in this cockpit. I also want to address the concrete embankment, because its role has been one of the most emotionally charged aspects of this entire disaster. The embankment supported the ILS localizer antenna array for runway 01 and was located beyond both the paved runway and the 300-meter clearway, well outside the area where any normally operating aircraft would ever reach. Airports are certified to strict international standards for obstacle placement, and under any normal scenario, even an overrun at moderate speed, this embankment would never be a factor. But Flight 2216 was not a normal scenario. An aircraft touching down 1,200 meters past the threshold at close to 200 knots, with no landing gear, no flaps, no spoilers, no reversers, and no brakes, will cover an enormous distance before stopping. The physics of the situation, a 60-ton metal object sliding on smooth nacelles with the wings still generating lift, meant that almost no runway in the world would have been long enough to bring this aircraft to a stop before hitting something. That said, the embankment was not frangible. In the United States, ILS antenna arrays are mounted on supports specifically designed to break apart on impact, so that if an aircraft does overrun, the structure does not become a catastrophic obstacle. International guidelines recommend the same approach. In January 2026, researchers concluded that if the embankment and antenna support had been built to frangible standards, the passengers would likely have survived the overrun itself. The deceleration from the belly landing, while severe, was not inherently unsurvivable. It was the high-speed impact with the rigid concrete that destroyed the aircraft and killed nearly everyone on board. Following the accident, South Korea's transport ministry announced it would remove concrete barriers at 7 airports nationwide. This is one of the clearest and most immediate safety changes to emerge from the investigation so far. This accident is a reminder of something that the aviation industry has spent decades trying to engineer away but never fully can. When enough failures align at the same moment, a bird strike at the worst possible altitude, a potential engine misidentification under extreme stress, a loss of electrical power that cascades through every system on the aircraft, a crew fighting manual reversion with no hydraulics and no time, the margins that normally keep everyone safe can collapse in minutes. The 737-800 is one of the most reliable aircraft ever built. The CFM56 engine has an extraordinary safety record. Bird strikes happen thousands of times a year with no consequence. But on this one morning, at this one airport, in these specific conditions, the combination was unsurvivable. What we owe the 179 people who did not come home from that flight is not speculation or blame. It is patience. It is a thorough, fact-driven investigation that follows the evidence wherever it leads. Even if the answers are uncomfortable, even if they challenge initial assumptions, even if they take years to emerge. And when those answers do come, it is the commitment to turn them into changes that ensure no other crew is ever placed in this same impossible position. I will follow up with a full narrative video when the final report is released. Until then, this is what we know. If you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe. Sharing these stories is how we make sure the lessons aren't forgotten. And if you want to understand how a routine winter departure nearly became a disaster because a single button was never pressed, that story is right here.